Okay, well, today we're going to talk about the Nuremberg trial. Um, and I hope that through it and next week, you'll see the connection between capitalism and war. And again, the capitalism is just the system, it's the people who go beyond simply making a reasonable way to transition from hunter-gatherer and earn money and change their living standards. It's when it goes to an extreme. Um, the Now that Germany and Japan are defeated, the big question is, what are the victors to do? What and who will govern? What to do with the vanquished, the hundreds of thousands of German prisoners? And the German leadership, how should they be handled? Understand, Churchill wanted summary executions. Stalin argued for a legal approach. He wanted due process. Heading the prosecution is a Supreme Court Associate Justice, Robert Jackson. We're going to learn more about him as the class goes on.
The Palace of Justice in Nuremberg. After the Second World War, nearly 200 defendants were brought here to be held accountable for 12 years of dictatorship, military aggression, terror, and mass murder. At the heart of proceedings was the International Military Tribunal, which tried key war criminals from Germany. The four victorious powers responded to the Nazis' once-in-a-millennium crimes with a once-in-a-millennium trial. On November 20th, 1945, some 20 high-ranking Nazi leaders were brought by elevator to the court in room 600. The former Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring willingly took on the role of most senior Nazi. He was followed by Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, whom Hitler had appointed as President of the Reich in his will, and Rudolf Hess, Hitler's former deputy.
The defendants never showed the slightest remorse. It was part of their stolz, their pride, to insist that they were right all the time and would do it again.
They stood accused of conspiracy to carry out wars of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The defendants were ruthless ministers and fanatical ideologues, merciless military commanders, and barbaric enforcers of Hitler's maniacal will.
They had come into the dock as if this was not a fair proceeding, as if they knew they were going to hang already. Why go through all this thing? That the Allies were being most unfair about this, of course.
For the first time in history, an entire state's leadership in the dock. To the high-ranking Nazi officials and military leaders, it was a case of the winners putting the losers on trial.
At the time, I couldn't imagine that there were any reasonable grounds on which to accuse these men. Later, of course, I understood it better.
No victorious nation or alliance had ever attempted anything as bold or complex as what the Allies were now doing with the surviving representatives of the Third Reich. The prosecutor's goal was nothing less than a global realignment brought about through the law.
This was not a trial of Germans alone. This was a trial for humanity. This was a trial to prevent tyranny from raising its head again in any place in the world.
Nuremberg, 1945. The old imperial city of the Middle Ages lay in ruins. After nearly 6 years of war, Nazi Germany had capitulated unconditionally. 60 million people were dead, the cost of Adolf Hitler's murderous quest for world domination. Germans who once zealously followed their Führer now wanted to forget. The main concern for most people was overcoming hunger and hardship. They weren't interested in the fate of the Nazi leadership. In May, when Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring was taken prisoner in Austria, it became clear that this war was not going to end the way those in the history books had. Göring had been certain the Americans would accept him as negotiator. But then he had to surrender his pistol and was arrested. Even then, Göring still believed the victorious Allies couldn't govern Germany without him. Being charged with a crime seemed completely out of the question. American reporters were allowed to interview Göring, who used his skill and charm to set himself apart from the realities of the war. He claimed to have fallen out with Hitler some time earlier. If he'd known what was happening in the concentration camps, he said, he would have taken vigorous action.
He wanted still to be, now after Hitler's death, the #1 Nazi. Which of course is interesting because Hitler had selected Dönitz, Grand Admiral Dönitz, to be his successor. Göring never really accepted that. And you could sense sort of a feeling of upstaging Dönitz. He was still the man who Hitler had chosen to be the #2 man. And he should have been the rightful successor to Adolf Hitler. He thought he was going into exile, go to a very fancy spa like Napoleon.
But not even his own people would accept the vain Göring as their new Führer. In Flensburg in May 1945, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, as Hitler's successor, appointed high-profile Nazis like Armaments Minister Albert Speer and high-ranking military commanders like Alfred Jodl to his cabinet. They acted as if they governed Germany, holding daily meetings, but they had no power. The most important perpetrators were already dead. Both Adolf Hitler and propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels had taken their own lives. In Berlin, the Russians displayed Goebbels' charred body. With the help of a cyanide capsule, SS leader Heinrich Himmler also evaded prosecution. He had tried in vain to join Dönitz's government. Disguised as a regular soldier, Himmler was picked up by a British patrol before committing suicide. At the end of the war, the Nazis' monstrous crimes had come to light. When the Americans liberated Ohrdruf concentration camp in Thuringia, they found few survivors. The conditions were indescribable. Along with the US troops, specialists came to the liberated camps to secure evidence and to arrest potential war criminals.
And my mind just refused to grasp what my eyes saw. I was coming in there to prove the crimes, and these people who were lying in the dirt, mostly you couldn't tell if they were dead or alive. If they stirred, it was unusual. These were objects, and you cannot look upon them as human beings. They didn't look like human beings, many of them.
As flagrant as the Nazis' inhuman policies were, it was still an incredibly complicated task for investigators to bring those responsible to justice. The crime of genocide didn't yet exist, and there was no legal mechanism to prosecute the internal affairs of a terrorist state. But the majority of Germany's victims came from the occupied countries of Europe. That gave the Allies the opportunity to criminally prosecute the Third Reich.
It was to bring to trial those whom we had captured because they had committed crimes against Allied soldiers in wartime, clear violation of the rules of war, or had been captured in concentration camps liberated by the Allies. You had a perfect case. There was nothing more to be said to prove that these were enormous crimes which were being systematically committed by everyone connected with that camp. And that's what we did, and it didn't take very long to do.
The idea for the Nuremberg trials dates back to the summer of 1944, when US President Franklin Delano Roosevelt told officials in Washington to devise strategies for bringing war criminals to justice.
This documentary is a German production by DW Documentary, the Nuremberg trial, and it shows actual footage. I'm going to also show excerpt from a documentary that's on Amazon, which is very good. And there is a dramatic representation of Nuremberg that's available on Netflix, which is also quite good.
In the aftermath of World War II, the world stood at a crossroads. Slowly, life came back to the ruins of Europe, cities reduced to heaps of rubble, and populations into beggars. How and why could such a disaster have happened? People wanted the answers. They wanted to know what happened and why. Without answers, there could be no closure. The horrors of the Nazi regime had been laid bare: concentration camps, genocide, and crimes against humanity. Justice demanded a reckoning. There were those who demanded summary execution, while others argued that justice had to be served and be seen to be served. 22 of the top Nazis had been rounded up. Many had surrendered to the Americans and British to avoid falling into Russian hands. Hitler's successor, Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz and Albert Speer, were two leading Nazis captured at Flensburg, near the Danish border, where they had attempted to form a new government to negotiate with the Allies.
Dönitz was the commander of Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare. With the arrest of Jodl and Dönitz, the Third Reich is ended forever.
But the biggest prize was the surrender of Hermann Göring. In the final days of the Third Reich, Hermann Göring, who had been Hitler's designated successor, found himself sidelined and disgraced. As Berlin collapsed under Soviet assault, Göring fled to Bavaria. Hitler ordered his execution, but Gestapo chief Ernst Kaltenbrunner was reluctant to carry out the order without written confirmation. On May 6, 1945, near Salzburg in Austria, he approached advancing American troops under a flag of truce. With him were his wife Emmy and their daughter Etta, as well as several military aides. Dressed in his ornate Luftwaffe uniform, adorned with medals, Göring presented himself to Brigadier General Robert Stack. The Reichsmarschall, who had once commanded Germany's vast air force, now calmly surrendered, requesting protection from the Soviets. Under heavy guard, he was transported to a secure Allied facility. Göring's capture marked the symbolic end of Nazi Germany's high command. Its most senior surviving leader was now a prisoner awaiting trial. While he waited for his fate to be decided, he was allowed to hold several press conferences. In a series of staged interviews, Göring appeared composed, even confident. Speaking through interpreters, he answered questions at length. He sought to present himself not as a defeated criminal, but as a statesman and soldier. He was, after all, a First World War fighter ace who had been decorated with Germany's highest military honor. Instead of showing contrition, he defended Nazi policies and blamed others for Nazi atrocities. He was still a skilled communicator and propagandist who charmed and manipulated reporters, sometimes drawing laughs or even admiration for his wit. Fearing he was turning the spotlight to his advantage, U.S. commanders shut down the conferences and placed him under tighter guard before the trials began at Nuremberg. Nuremberg was chosen for the trials for both practicality and symbolism. Its palace of justice had survived the war, complete with a secure prison. It also lay in the American zone, and it was the Americans who were going to be responsible for the administration and security. Holding the trial in Nuremberg was a deliberate reversal. The city that had showcased Nazi power would now witness its leaders brought to justice. But there was one big question that had to be answered before the trials could begin. Were these men who had perpetrated some of the worst crimes in history sane? Responsibility for finding the answer fell in part to Dr. Douglas Kelly, a young American Army psychiatrist. His task was unprecedented: to assess the mental health of some of history's most notorious war criminals. Kelly was methodical. He conducted daily interviews with men like Hermann Göring and Rudolf Hess. He administered psychological tests, including the Rorschach inkblot test, seeking patterns, disorders, and signs of insanity. What he found was chilling. It was not madness, but cold calculation. These were men of above-average intelligence. Many were manipulative, self-serving, and deeply narcissistic, but they were not insane. The task facing Justice Robert H. Jackson, the chief American prosecutor, and the Allied prosecutors was a daunting one. All of the Allies agreed that Nazi Germany must be punished for the unprecedented nature of its crimes. However, it was also agreed that a predetermined show trial was to be avoided, to dispel as much as possible the idea of a vindictive victor's justice. As such, each of the 22 Nazi defendants present at Nuremberg stood accused of one or more of the following 4 new categories of crimes outlined by Jackson and the International Military Tribunal: participation in a common plan or conspiracy for the accomplishment of a crime against peace, planning, initiating and waging wars of aggression and other crimes against peace, participating in war crimes, and crimes against humanity. From the outset, the Allies recognized the Nuremberg trials as a moment the world must witness. Courtrooms were rigged with lights and cameras, an unprecedented move for an international tribunal. American crews working with newsreel companies filmed in both black and white and early color, capturing testimony, evidence, and the faces of the accused. Footage was rushed to cinemas worldwide, giving the public a first-hand look at Nazi leaders confronted with their crimes. The recordings also served as a permanent legal record, preserving not just the verdicts but the process of justice itself.
Muted. Sal, you muted. You're still muted.
How did that happen?
We can hear you now.
Okay, it's important to understand the huge significance of Nuremberg. And it ties in with the determination of Roosevelt and Stalin to create a United Nations. Roosevelt and Stalin had a fairly tight relationship, and they were united in being opposed to continued colonialism. They saw colonialism as at the root of the causes of the war, but they wanted to establish a rule of law. And they looked at this trial as being the first step of establishing an international order that would apply law to prevent further world wars. Now, I have here, pictures of the majority in the Supreme Court, and you can see there's Harvard, Yale, Yale, Harvard, Yale, Notre Dame. Obviously, highly educated people now really controlling the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court that has lost popularity amongst the American people. Its approval ratings are at some of its lowest. And I want to hold that in contrast to, Robert Jackson, because here is a guy who really leads it all and establishes the mechanisms for an international criminal court. He creates the ideas of crimes against humanity. He's the lead prosecutor at Nuremberg. He's considered one of the shining stars, if not the shining star in Supreme Court history. And his cases are made based on conspiracies, conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, conspiracy to commit war crimes, conspiracies to create crimes against humanity. It's important to understand, though, he's a guy who didn't graduate college. He only attended 1 year of law school at Albany Law School in New York. Today, that school is ranked number 8 in law schools with the most graduates who are serving in the public interest. I think that's a significant accomplishment for him to have done what he achieved. Get to my next 8:20.
Justice Robert H. Jackson, the chief American prosecutor, made the opening statement for the prosecution. He said,
of opening the first trial in history.
The privilege of opening the first trial in history for crimes against the peace of the world imposes a grave responsibility. The wrongs which we seek to condemn and punish have been so calculated, so malignant, and so devastating that civilization cannot tolerate their being ignored because it cannot survive their being repeated. That 4 great nations, flushed with victory and stung with injury, stay the hand of vengeance and voluntarily submit their captive enemies to the judgment of the law is one of the most significant tributes that power has ever paid to reason. This inquest represents the practical effort of 4 of the most mighty of nations, with the support of 15 more, to utilize international law to meet the greatest menace of our times, aggressive war. The common sense of mankind demands that law shall not stop with the punishment of petty crimes by little people. It must also reach men who possess themselves of great power and who make deliberate and concerted use of it to set in motion evils which leave no home in the world untouched. In the prisoner's dock sit 20-odd broken men, reproached by the humiliation of those they have led, almost as bitterly as by the desolation of those they have attacked. Their personal capacity for evil is forever past. Merely as individuals, their fate is of little consequence to the world. What makes this inquest significant is that these prisoners represent sinister influences that will lurk in the world long after their bodies have returned to dust. We will not ask you to convict these men on the testimony of their foes. There is no count of the indictment that cannot be proved by books and records.
United States of America present count 1 of the indictment, that all the defendants participated as organizers or accomplices in a common plan or conspiracy to commit crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity.
The aims of this conspiracy were open
and notorious. The aims of this conspiracy were open and notorious. It was far different from any other conspiracy ever unfolded before a court of justice. Its history is the history of the Nazi Party, which grew from the brawling streets of Munich in the 20s. And from the beginning, Adolf Hitler and his followers were committed to the use of any means, whether or not they were legal or honorable. Their aim was the highest degree of control over the German community. Their intentions were blatantly put forth in Mein Kampf and the party program. And they preached their favorite doctrine up and down the land. They said that persons of a so-called German blood were a master race, entitled to subjugate or even exterminate other races. They said that the Germans should be ruled under the Führerprinzip, or leadership principle, by which each sub-leader owed unconditional obedience to his superior, and so on right up to Adolf Hitler. They said that war was a noble and necessary activity of Germany. And they said that the Nazi Party alone had the right to rule Germany and the right to destroy the party's enemies. Their rise to power was based on fraud, deceit, intimidation, and coercion, culminating finally in terror and flame. Into that flame went the democratic constitution of the Weimar Republic and the freedom of the German people. For the fires set by the Nazis extended to the very Reichstag. Hans Gesavius, a witness who formerly held a high position in the Berlin police administration, tells of his investigation of the Reichstag fire.
Um es kurz zu sagen, zunächst den Tatbestand zu geben, haben wir festgestellt.
To speak briefly and to state the facts. First of all, we ascertained that quite generally, Hitler had stated the wish for a large-scale propaganda campaign. Goebbels took on the job of making the necessary proposals, and it was Goebbels who first thought of setting the Reichstag on fire. A group of 10 reliable SA men was made ready, and now Goering was informed about every detail of the plan. It was expected from Goering, and he gave his assurances that he would do so, that the police would be instructed, while still suffering from shock, to take up a false trail.
Using the Reichstag fire as a pretext for seizing power, the Nazi conspirators lost no time in tearing Germany away from a policy of peace.
I think it is important to contemplate through all of these classes when we see these marching off to war, that there's a pattern. And the question is to look at where we are today and to see if that pattern is following the same path or similar path. As I look at all of them, there's, they talk about how the Nazis put out their plan in Mein Kampf. Think of Project 2025. Illegal invasions. If our activities in Iran today go before a court, certainly I believe they would not be able to stand up to what has become the law, the international law. So it's as we look at these things, it's important to try to see how these patterns play out, not just then, but today. Now, let's look at the final closing arguments and verdict.
With general confidence, it must stand above the contesting parties.
In the name of the United States of America, Justice Jackson delivers his summation.
These men saw no evil, spoke none, and none was uttered in their presence. When we put all of their stories together, this is the ridiculous composite picture of Hitler's government that emerges. It was composed of a number 2 man who knew nothing of the excesses of the Gestapo which he created. A number 3 man who was merely an innocent middleman transmitting Hitler's orders without even reading them, like a postman or a delivery boy. A foreign minister who knew little of foreign affairs and nothing of foreign policy. A security chief who was of the impression that the policing functions of his Gestapo and SD were somewhat on the order of directing traffic. A party philosopher who was interested in historical research and had no idea of the violence which his philosophy was inciting in the 20th century. Now, this may seem like a fantastic exaggeration, but this is what you would actually be obliged to conclude if you were to acquit these defendants. If you were to say of these men that they are not guilty, it would be as true to say that there has been no war, that there are no slain, that there has been no crime.
In the name of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Sir Hartley Shawcross delivers his summation.
This trial must form a milestone in the history of civilization, not only bringing retribution to these guilty men, not only marking that right shall, in the end, triumph over evil, but also that the ordinary people of the world, and I make no distinction now between friend and foe, are now determined that the individual must transcend the state. The state and the law are made for man, that through them he may achieve a fuller life, a higher purpose, a greater dignity.
In the name of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, General Rudenko delivers his summation.
And when we ask, have the charges against the defendants been proved before the court? Have the defendants been convicted of their guilt? There is only one answer. Their crimes have been proved. Neither the statements of the defendants nor the arguments of the defense were able to refute our grave accusations. It has been impossible to cast doubt on events which actually took place. The truth cannot be challenged. That is the real meaning of this trial. That is the lasting result of our long and strenuous effort.
In the name of the French Republic, Monsieur Duribe delivers his summation.
When this international trial is closed and the principal war criminals sentenced, we shall go back to our own countries. The fate of these men now lies entirely with your conscience. This is beyond our competence. Our task is finished. Now it is for you, in the silence of your deliberations, to listen to innocent blood crying for justice.
Lord Justice Lawrence, Great Britain, Mr. Francis Biddle, United States, Monsieur de Faber, France, and Major General Nikitchenko, USSR, and their alternates prepare the verdict. It will be based on the opinion of the majority. On October 1st, 1946, the verdict is delivered by Lord Justice Lawrence, President of the Tribunal.
Of the organizations The SS, SD, Gestapo, and Leadership Corps are found guilty. The High Command, SA, and Reich Cabinet not guilty. As for the individual, Wilhelm Hermann Goering, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Death by hanging. Rudolf Hess, guilty of conspiracy and crimes against peace. Life imprisonment. Joachim von Ribbentrop, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Death by hanging. Wilhelm Keitel, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Death by hanging. Ernst Kaltenbrunner, guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Death by hanging. Alfred Rosenberg, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Death by hanging. Hans Frank, guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Death by hanging. Wilhelm Frick, guilty of crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Death by hanging. Julius Streicher, guilty of crimes against humanity. Death by hanging. Walter Funk, guilty of crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Life imprisonment. Hjalmar Schacht, not guilty on this indictment, released. Karl Dönitz, guilty of crimes against peace and war crimes, 10 years imprisonment. Erich Raeder, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, and war crime, life imprisonment. Baldur von Schirach, guilty of crimes against humanity, 20 years imprisonment. Fritz Saukel, guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Alfred Jodl, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Franz von Papen, not guilty on this indictment, released. Albert Speer, guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, 20 years imprisonment. Konstantin von Neurath, guilty of conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, 15 years imprisonment. Arthur Seyss-Inquart, guilty of crimes against peace, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, death by hanging. Hans Fritzsche, not guilty on this indictment, released. Martin Bormann, tried in absentia, guilty of war crimes and crimes against humanity, death by hanging.
I wanted you to hear all of that because it has a sobering effect, I believe. And I think all of it requires a sobriety that often the people who plow into war seem to go like it's a team rally as opposed to the horror that it will inflict upon people. This really sets a stage for international associations to create a better world, I think. And my sense, as I've said before, of what can make us hopeful is that we have the early 100 years of the first institutions to start to teach humans how to live with each other. And I want to also point out that when you step back and look at the broader picture of things that are going on in the world, I was born in 1951. America's population was about 150 million. Today it's 320, 330 million. The world population was about 3 billion. Today it's well over 8 billion. If you look at that expansion, and if it keeps at the pace that it's gone over the past 100 years, resources will be scarce. The sustainability of the earth and the people inhabiting it are going to become a lot more contentious. And so we will need institutions that can regulate peace, but also can address the broader problems of sustainability. Okay, with that, we can open for discussion.
Please use the raise your hand function and ask a short, succinct question to Sal. Also, ironically enough, I'd like to share something. This particular book I'm reading right now for my book club, and it's about how Goering personally went to France to pillage paintings that Jewish people had there, and if they left, they considered it abandoned property, and he considered his own personal, it was free for taking. So this is a really good book if anybody's interested. And does anybody have a question for Sal? Joy.
Stop your share, Dave.
Okay, let's see. Stop share.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, seeing these videos in black and white, it's as if we're going to see the colorized version now via Trump. I cannot get over this.
Yeah, I mean it's the similarities are so stark.
Yeah.
It's frightening. Yeah.
And that people don't see this. That's what's even scary, that we have two totally different sets of facts.
Look, Xi Jinping argues that this democracy thing is not viable. How do you get consensus on dealing with some of the biggest issues? And it opens itself to corruption. And if we are in the age of corruption, so yeah, there's some big questions to be addressed.
The amount of corruption, the blatant that's out there is just unfathomable to anybody who World War II was recent history.
Look, World War II was America's greatest moment.
Yeah, and our parents were involved in it.
And when you consider the transition from that to where we are today, this is a dramatic, something has happened. I tried to make the argument in the Trump landscape that what was going on were the Charles Kochs and others like them, the very rich, powerful right wing of America. We had the Nazis in America before the war. Well, after the war, they coalesced under different names, and so they've been successful. Yeah, they found fertile ground here in America.
Yeah, really.
Lewis.
Thank you. Sal, it was very interesting to. I know I've seen that before, but it was decades ago probably, and it is very sobering. One question on, I got two questions, but the one on this is, were there any people in the business world in Germany that were brought to this trial, or were they brought to other trials in the past for corroborating whatever? I think of the steel companies, the armament companies, et cetera. Question one. Question two, you brought up something interesting. You said the relationship between Roosevelt and Stalin was special. Maybe you could elaborate more too on that too, because just elaborate more. I guess I don't understand that relationship or haven't really studied it.
Yeah. Well, first, the first question about businesses being brought before Nuremberg. What we saw the clips from were the first Nuremberg trials. There were trials subsequent to that, and yes, business people were put on trial. Next week, that's what we're going to look at. And I have to tell you, I have a range of documentaries that could go for about 4 hours. And I've narrowed it down a little bit, but I have to narrow it down further. And so, as you know, I do a lot of, not, I plan all this stuff out and I have it laid out, but then I start making changes as time goes on, based on the questions that are asked and that sort of thing, so I can kind of, tailor it to what people are interested in. But yes, we're going to look at that. And the thing that stands out to me are the American companies who had their affiliates in Germany who escaped prosecution. And and mind you, for Germany to identify where all the Jewish people were across Eastern Europe, right? That was no small task. It was IBM who brought computer technology to Hitler and his people and showed them how they could identify people with 1% of Jewish blood and provide those lists to the Nazis through Poland, through Czechoslovakia, all over. I mean, it's shameful, and it's interesting to me. I've asked the question: does anyone know of anything that could have been a big money maker, where the question before government and business was, is this good for our society? And has there ever been a decision that said, no, we need to stop this? Think of the atomic bomb. I mean, the people developing the atomic bomb were very concerned. What are we going to do with this stuff? This is not good for humanity. Oppenheimer goes and meets with Truman, and Truman throws him out. Because Oppenheimer wants to say, this is lethal. This is not that don't use it. It was understand we're going to unleash something that once we've opened that door, we know that this atomic bomb is a baby. We know what the next steps are to neutron bombs. And Truman throws him out. AI is coming. We did a class. You were a key participant in that class. And the point to be made was AI is just like capitalism, not evil in and of itself. But what parameters, what boundaries we put on it. Today, there's no boundaries being put on. The people making it, who are deep into it, who can make a lot of money out of it, are raising alarms. So, I mean, the argument that I make about greed may seem, far-fetched or, kind of liberal crazy stuff or whatever. I mean, stop and smell the roses. And to your other question about the relationship between FDR and Roosevelt, remember, Roosevelt comes from the upper classes. He understood that his peers were terrified of communism. Most of them didn't even know what it meant, but it frightened them. And they mounted campaigns to demean communism. So he understands that. He also knows Russia is making the great human sacrifice. They and really doing extraordinary stuff in fighting the Germans. So and Averell Harriman is his ambassador to Moscow, and so he understands a lot of what's going on there, and he knows Stalin is not as he has been presented. Stalin what happens, they meet a couple of times before Tehran, the big three, but they don't act, but Stalin doesn't get a personal interaction with him until Tehran. And it's in Tehran that they become really close. And mind you, they meet before the conference, and they don't invite Churchill. And Churchill is livid about that. So then they come together, and now they're talking about getting ready for D-Day. And Churchill wants to even postpone D-Day because he wants to attack into Italy. And Stalin, his radar is up. He's like, what he wants to do is cordon off that part of Europe, make it safe so that they can then say to hell with the rest of it. He even is concerned that Churchill may want to negotiate a deal with the Germans. And so he keeps pushing it to say, we can't have a firm date for D-Day. Roosevelt is, no, the prime thing is to invade France so we can attack France. George Marshall, the general George Marshall, is all about, we have got to invade France and push into Germany. That is that's the most important thing to do. Stalin is completely on board with that. And so when Churchill keeps bringing up, entering Italy and that kind of stuff, he's shut down, but he won't give up on it. And he keeps pushing it until they're really angry with him. It's over. We're going to have D-Day in June, the beginning of June. And so they are very much in sync. And it is FDR and Stalin, without anyone else involved, who are talking about what will we do in the post-war? How will we govern Germany? They're arguing, they're discussing Vietnam. They know that Churchill wants to recreate his colonial empire. They're saying that's nuts. the colonialism's got to go. And Stalin is saying, we don't want to have colonies. And Stalin had ended the Comintern. The Comintern was to be all the countries that adopted a communist government were together in the Comintern, and that they would follow the direction of Russia. And he does away with it because it's too much like colonization. So, FDR at the top of FDR's list is ending colonialism, and the top of the list for Stalin is opening the second front and and having a world order that is going to prevent future world wars.
But Stalin wanted satellites. So what's the difference?
Well, yeah, but they're not under his. But a lot of that emerges after the war ends, because what happens is FDR is gone, Harry Truman comes in, and Harry Truman is turning his back on FDR's position. So now Stalin gets back to paranoia. I've got to establish, a buffer. And, that what's going to happen is they're going to do what they did before and they'll be coming after the Soviet Union.
Norman?
There's a lot to unpack here. The view that you're presenting of Stalin is quite different than the historical view that we've certainly learned over many years. I'm going to read that book, which came out in 2021, I think. And
2015, the one that I've been sending you clips from.
Yeah,
that's 2015. But she also has a book about
another book,
the communications between Stalin and FDR, so you can read their, what they were sending.
The correspondence.
Yeah.
But anyway, there was a big disjunction. Stalin at the same time was killing thousands of people in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he did not countenance any political or any political opposition. I mean, they were put into gulags and prisons and killed. So the view of history that's being presented, if Roosevelt had lived, perhaps the Iron Curtain would not have existed.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps it would have been more hegemony between the United States and Russia. But, I happen to be I'm still reading Sven Beckert's book on capitalism. So I happen to be at the part with the end of World War II. And it's just astonishing how most of the large German industrial companies, including companies that still exist, whose cars many of us drive, employed as much as 50% of their labor force was forced labor, was concentration camps. In fact, they ran their own concentration camps, including I forgot the name of the head of the steel industry, but they ran 17 concentration camps, and they ran them just like the Nazis did.
Mm-hmm.
So there was not a big line between the state and the large industry. So it wasn't state capitalism, but they certainly bought the Nazi ideology and were using it as much as possible to get market share. And they were selling tremendous amounts of armaments to the German government. And it's just astonishing what was going on. But also what's interesting is Sven Beckert in his book points out how the United States was fortunate. Well, the United States had its own internal imperialism, where it seized the western part, the original 13 colonies and the eastern states kept on going west, the so-called manifest destiny, and because of that got a lot of natural resources, which the European nations didn't have. And Germany didn't have. It was an industrial power, but it didn't have natural resources to use in its industries. So that's why it wanted The Ruhr Valley wanted part of France. The Saar Valley wanted to go east and wanted to go to Africa.
But that's why Africa was so important.
Right. Africa became very, very important. So it was the expansion of capitalism. But what's interesting is that, as you described, capitalism has turned out to be a very malleable, not ideology, but a very malleable means of production. I mean, you can have it in China. They may call it something else, but it's really capitalism. You can have it in Russia. You call it something else, but it's capitalism. You have it in the United States. You have it in most nations in the world. But it's very adaptable to what conditions exist.
It's making products and services. Yeah. No, Nor, I want to, I'm not promoting Stalin. I don't want, I just, I want to, but there are, what happens, I think, with history is that the historian knows what they know at the point that they're doing their research. Time goes on, more stuff becomes available, and it doesn't directly contradict what was done before, but it adds more detail, more nuance. So it just becomes a more complicated picture over time. You're right. Stalin let people die because they didn't have the food to feed them, and they were trying to change their agriculture program. They were going to follow some ideology about communism that didn't work. And so, yeah, there's lots of stains all over him, but that doesn't negate the positions that he was taking and the relationship that he had formed with FDR. And mind you, the Iron Curtain was was the term that was given by Churchill.
Microphone is on.
Yeah.
But remember also the Russians used the post-war period to seize a lot of countries in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, and again, it's that point where FDR is gone, Truman is in, and Truman gets off to a combative relationship with Stalin, and so it's and he switches with it. Yeah.
Ralph, did you have a comment?
Yeah. Oh, Ralph?
Yeah, go ahead, Ralph.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Am I on? Yeah, you're on.
Yes.
Sal, you've drawn parallels between our current administration and previous other administrations around the world. One of the things I'm kind of curious about is that my impression of Hitler was that he was sort of you might say spiritually motivated. He had this sort of ideology of the master race, but I don't usually associate him with plunder. A lot of his associates were plundering artwork and industry and so forth. But the current administration seems to be primarily concerned with plunder and growth of wealth. And I just wonder if that's so. When we say that the current administrator is Hitlerian, I think there's a sort of a difference there. I don't see our current administrators being spiritually motivated. I'm using the word spiritually.
Yeah, more ideological kind of. It's a good point, Ralph. I with any of these, there's never a direct comparison. There's always differences here, there, and elsewhere. But on the broad pattern of where, these forces are leading, I think it becomes pretty clear. I think the idea that we are pushing towards an autocracy, a dictator rule, is something that I suspect, that I think is possible to happen. I'm cautious about it. Um, the current administration certainly wants to plunder as much as it can. It's making, these business decisions that were anathema to the American political system before this administration. Um, it's kind of shocking. There's so much shocking stuff. It's hard to be, have one thing to be enraged about because there's so many. Um, but I think it's important to just kind of pick up on some of the um, similarities between this, and I can go back into the Roman Empire and find examples of the same thing happening. Um, there's one of the things I mentioned before is that the key book on the Roman Empire is The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. It's saying from the beginning that it started, it was in decline. This was gonna be a failed enterprise. Um, and I think we're kind of looking at that happening to America, and it's foreboding. It's foreboding to me. On the spiritual, ideological side, my view is Trump has no ideology. His existence is to cause chaos and to do things that are outrageous. Um, behind him are the Christian nationalists that are there who have an ideology. Project 2025 is an ideology and a game plan, much like was laid out in Mein Kampf. So there are those similarities. I also see Hitler as, just as I see Trump, that they're not the key disease. The disease is something that is behind the scenes, that has created a landscape that Hitler exploited and that Trump has exploited. And we were talking about the people who had made, the cars that many of us drive today, where their businesses were run with concentration camp labor. Those are the people behind the scenes who are they're the people who funded the Nazis, got the Nazis going, but they're out of sight. We don't, yes, we know who they are, but they're not prominent. Same here in America. The people who took over the John Birch Society, and other institutions like that, they're out there doing their thing, and that's what I feel is being exploited. I don't know if that responds to your point. I hope it does. Yeah.
Thank you.
So you said that Trump had no ideology, but he's definitely Hitler and Trump are prejudiced against other groups. I mean, there's immigrants and blacks. Hitler didn't particularly like blacks or Jews or gypsies. Neither of them like. Well, I think he's okay. Trump's probably okay with gays, but I'm just saying that But the prejudice seems to be with both Hitler and Trump.
The interesting thing from what I've read is that, well, Hitler was, a low-ranking, infantryman in the German army in World War One, the List regiment that he was a part of.
Yeah.
none of those, they've been interviewed, and people from his regiment were interviewed about Hitler, and none of them remember him being anti-Semitic. That he had no ideas like that. It's only it's and what several authors have suggested is that it's after he is injured in a I think a mustard gas attack, might have been a chlorine gas attack. He really is seriously injured in that, and it's at that time that the German government is capitulating. They're saying we need to negotiate an armistice, which is essentially saying we're defeated. But it's not a clear surrender. But for Hitler, it is a surrender. And mind you, he has taken in what his superiors have said and what's been communicated to the public, which is we are winning this war. So Hitler believes we're winning, and then he gets wounded and he's in a hospital and he's seeing his country fall apart. And his doctor, as Hitler is really struggling with the shock, the shell shock that he's been through, his doctor slaps him around and says, "Be a man. Be a man." Well, Hitler became a man. I mean, I see those. Maybe I'm making more out of it than I should, but the juxtaposition of it suggests to me that what might not have resonated with him before resonated then, and so he's a different kind of monster that's been grown from Trump. But that doesn't mean there aren't a lot of similarities. Yeah.
So,
Lauren?
I just want to quick ask, relating it to today's situation, what is Steve Bannon in all of this? He seems to be the one that's kind of behind the scenes and riling everybody up. He's done a lot of work in Europe and probably worked with that was it Gorban or whatever it is from Hungary, and getting all those people. So I'm kind of wondering, like, what he's not intrinsically one of the rich people, but he seems motivated by something to upend everything.
Okay, for those who might not have heard what Lauren was saying, she was asking what role is Steve Bannon playing, since he has, he's not one of the wealthy guys, but he's out there and he's having influence here and in Europe. He's connected with the Murdochs, and the Murdochs are Silicon Valley rich family that is kind of tied in with the Peter Thiel and PayPal and all of those folks that are right-wing, high-tech people with a lot of money. And they have Steve Bannon has been their Samuel Adams. Remember Samuel Adams, American Revolution, kept stirring the mud, get people agitated, don't toss the tea in the water, get drunk, all that kind of. Well, that's Steve Bannon. He's an agitator. And again, the people have been primed for this. Americans at the end of World War II loved their country, loved their government. It took a massive effort to drive a wedge between Americans and America. And the people who put the money in it are behind the scenes, but those who are out there driving the wedge are like the Steve Bannons.
And what does out of this? They must pay him money or something.
There's always ways to exchange money. Yeah, Sam Adams still has beer out there today with his name on it.
Before we go out and drink, Sal, what are we going to be doing next week?
We're going to look at the companies, the businesses that were put on trial at Nuremberg.
And if everybody...
Because again, keep in mind, all these monsters that we see, they get there because someone's putting money into them.
Yeah.
And the people who are putting that money, they don't want to be seen.
Yeah.
Just as another little quirk out there, the same book that Dave mentioned notes that Hitler seemed to have a similar, or Trump-esque building need, edifice complex, because he wanted to build all these buildings. Just another coincidence.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I'm sorry, but the things that come to mind are things I shouldn't repeat. That what going through my head. There's a phalanx of buildings, right?
Exactly. I hear giggling from the other room.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And if everybody can give some warm applause to Sal for
we've run over, huh?
Yep. And
because I was going to ask Bob, do you have anything to add? My friend Bob Goggins always has great.
I'm over here, but I don't have anything to add for today. But thanks for the opportunity.
Okay, great. All right, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Sal.
Thanks, Lou. Good to have you here, as always.
Yes, thanks, Sal.
Thanks, Sal.
Thank you.
Okay.